Welcome to my channel. We hope you find enjoyment in today's tale. My wife betrayed me once was sufficient. I'm certain she believed everything was under her control and was caught off guard by my reaction. The ensuing events were a common tale. Married for 15 years, life had grown mundane. We drifted apart, residing in the same dwelling, under one roof, yet in separate rooms. She became distant from me. Eventually, I realized that we were no longer partners, confidants, or lovers. She left too many clues. 34, I conducted some investigations, and it was revealed that she was involved in an affair, at least an emotional one. She began voicing complaints to me. This was typical, and over time, I had ceased paying attention to her grievances and taunts. Now, armed with this fresh evidence, I truly listened. She was dissatisfied with our marriage. She had lost her affection for me. It was evident to me that if I had attempted to argue that she was mistaken, that we could mend our love, that I adored her, and we could rejuvenate our relationship, she would have only withdrawn further. 104, she simply gazed at me, and in her eyes I saw yet another bridge between us falling apart. To hell with all this, I muttered to myself, finishing my drink. I replayed our previous dispute in my mind repeatedly, searching for a way to reclaim her affection. After all, she belonged to me. It seemed, I mused, that the more I tried to win my wife back, the more she pulled away. I stayed up late, letting my wife sleep peacefully in our large family bed, while I nursed my hurt feelings. Along the way, my mind sparked a new perspective. 138, a fresh way of thinking emerged. Why did I argue with her about her feelings? Indeed, why? At that moment, I recognized the truth in what my wife had been expressing. A truth I couldn't simply dismiss or convince her out of. She was expressing her emotions, and there I was, contesting them, telling her she was mistaken, that she wasn't actually feeling those emotions. How absurd was that? How can you tell someone they are wrong about their emotions? It ended right there. Her feelings were her own, so why debate? 208, so what was I feeling? Odd? No, actually, it was peculiar, because as I sat in the darkness on the couch, contemplating my recent relationship with my wife, I realized that I too was unhappy. I was unsure whether I still loved her. I was enamored with the idea of us still being together and married to my affectionate wife, but that was not the reality, was it? This moment of revelation jolted me. It took some time to piece everything together, but now I had a strategy. Whether it succeeded or not at that moment didn't matter, because I now. 240 understood that what I was doing and what she was doing was not effective. What does this mean? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing that failed repeatedly, expecting it to succeed this time. I smiled, disposed of my drink containers into the bin, and opted to sleep in the spare bedroom. This was all part of the plan. Frank, Linda opened the door to the spare bedroom and switched on the light, disrupting my sleep. Why are you in the spare room? I shielded my eyes from the light until they adjusted. 309, I stayed up late, didn't want to disturb you, I explained. She gazed at me, then shuffled off to the kitchen for some coffee. I'm not one to drink coffee, as I'm blessed with the capability to wake up and become alert instantly. I hopped into the shower and readied myself for the upcoming confrontation. Today, my step was lively. Linda sat across from me in the living room. I was in my usual spot on the sofa. Linda clenched her fists. She was tense, and I sensed she was about to speak up. Frank, she started, this isn't working. I feel disheartened and confused, and I no longer think I love you. I sat and observed her. She paused, then proceeded. Frank, I realize we've been together for a considerable period, but I believe it's time for us to part ways officially, she declared. The word lingered between us. I grinned as she anxiously gazed at me. That sounds reasonable, dear, I replied. She blinked. Frank, did you listen to me? I nodded. Yes, of course I heard you. You feel it's not right anymore. You don't love me. You want a separation. I concur. Do you comprehend now? She appeared perplexed. I stood and moved towards her, kneeling before her. Linda, I cannot alter your feelings. You don't love me. How could I possibly contest that? Could I convince you otherwise? No, you don't love me. Honestly, there have been numerous instances in our lives when I felt the same. If you believe you can't stay with me again, how could I argue? Linda looked at me as though I had lost my senses, yet deep down, I noticed she acknowledged my acute perception of the truth in her words, and she appreciated it. Wait, you said you didn't love me? She inquired. There were moments, just like for you, I admitted. She was slightly unsettled. Throughout her mental rehearsals of this conversation, she never anticipated my response. I enjoyed watching her emotions play across her face. Well, I stated, anything else? I need to leave tonight, so I'd like to resolve this now. If you don't mind, are you departing right this instant? I stood donning my jacket, ready to exit. No, Frank. Where are you going? I'm leaving. I think I'll visit a few taverns. I waved farewell to her and exited, leaving her seated in the chair, her mouth agape. I stopped at the closest tavern where I ordered a bourbon and positioned myself at a table away from the crowd. I pulled out my mobile phone and initiated another phase of my plan. I dialed Jessica, a colleague known throughout our office as the foremost gossip. Assuming the role of the forsaken husband, I somberly shared with her the conversation I had with my wife, particularly how she had blindsided me with her request for a divorce. The actual reason I called her, not that I was in the tavern drowning my sorrows in whiskey and might skip work the next day, was clear in my mind. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Since Jessica and I sometimes flirted at the office and she was unattached, the next thing I knew, Jessica had invited herself to join me for the night under the guise of looking after me while I was in such an emotionally fragile state. I met Jessica at a bar known to be a frequent spot for my wife and her companions. Was I worried about being seen? No, my marriage was evidently concluded. My wife didn't love me, and frankly, I wasn't fond of my wife Linda at that moment either. Jessica arrived promptly, clad appealingly and provocatively, perhaps aiming to reach me before anyone else had the opportunity at least. That's what I preferred to think. But upon seeing me, she was somewhat startled that my body language and demeanor did not reflect the news I had shared with her over the phone. The grin on my face didn't assist either. Frank, what's occurring? She inquired, settling beside me with a confused look. I raised my hand, pointing to my now bare ring finger. She wants a divorce, that's how she feels. Why should I resist? I summoned the waiter and ordered another drink. Jessica requested her usual Cosmo. Frank, over the phone you seemed more distressed. Jess, we've been discontent for a while. I finally recognized that maybe I don't love her as I once did. She wants this divorce, so you know what? I'm not going to oppose it. She wants to leave. Fine. I'm not going to languish. Forgotten and unloved, Jessica took a significant gulp of her cocktail, sitting and observing me. Now I realized I was impacting this woman. Whatever my attitude, it was puzzling her. Maybe we should dance. I didn't await her reply. I simply took her hand and led her to the dance floor. Frank, what are you planning? I drew her closer. I'm going to give her everything she thinks she wants. Right now I want to dance with you. In fact, I've wanted to dance with you for quite some time. Now I can. She gazed into my eyes and smiled. If you're trying to retaliate against her, I raised an eyebrow. Maybe she leaned in, pressing her body against mine, feeling snug and warm. I'm okay with that, she exhaled. We lost track of time, reveling in the freedom of not having to notify Linda of my return. Jessica was engaging, bright, and we spent the night flirting. She was utterly into me, and it was mutual. Yet, I didn't bring her home with me. It was comforting to feel desired. My wife had dented my pride, but Jessica had restored it. Moreover, I would admit Jessica seemed more appealing than Linda. We shared a kiss in the parking lot by her car. I opened her door and grinned, "See you tomorrow at work." She nodded. I had made it clear I was just looking for some light-hearted fun presently and wasn't ready to commit to another relationship, a notion Jessica grasped. I was now on the lookout for someone solely for myself, confident that by tomorrow's end, every woman at the company would be aware. I am usually a composed man, but truthfully, I was eager to flaunt this in Linda's face, I thought. "Where have you been?" Linda snapped as I entered our home. She was in bed, but rose to confront me as I arrived. I stored my coat and began undressing for bed. "I went out," I replied. "I informed you I was leaving. Why does it matter to you, Frank?" "I was worried you might harm yourself," she responded. I smiled at her. "Linda, I understand how you feel, and I'm fine with it. You want a divorce. I will happily grant you one. I have no desire to force you to stay with someone you don't love." I grabbed my pillow and clothes for the next day and headed to the guest room. Frank, Linda called out tentatively. I paused, shifting my belongings to my other hand. She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't understand. I mean, you don't have to sleep in a different bed. Are you saying you'll sleep elsewhere, move out of our bedroom? I didn't want to make it easy for her. She gasped and wiped away a tear. I didn't mean that. I mean, you can share the bed with me if you want. If you don't want to, well, I guess I could move to another room. She was anxious. The idea of moving out of her bedroom was something she had never considered. She held her breath, fearing I would force her to do just that. I spared her the distress. Well, this bed is more comfortable. I'll stay here with you if it's not too much trouble. Her expression brightened. Oh yes, that would be wonderful. I mean, it's no trouble for me. Then it's settled, I declared, tossing the pillow back onto the bed. She wanted to continue the conversation, but I was too exhausted and told her we'd talk more later. Indeed, by the following evening, 3 women at work had approached me flirtatiously, and a friend even gave me his sister's number. She was a widow struggling to find a date. I scheduled dates for the upcoming week with all 4 women, including another outing with Jessica. I intentionally kept this evening free because I needed to speak with Linda. We needed to sort everything out. I presumed she needed to lead her own life. When I got home, Linda confronted me. Carol saw you last night at the bar, she stated. She said you were with a woman. Who the hell was she? What were you doing together? Carol had mentioned how comfortable we seemed. I could have lashed out at her, yelled at her, called her careless for engaging with men, drifting away from me. But I didn't. I smiled and told her I'd answer her questions after I changed. She tried to confront me, but I ignored her and went to change into my home attire. Once comfortable, I noticed Linda's intense stare. She was primed for a confrontation, her eyes teary yet her body rigid with anger. It was Jessica from work, I confessed. I didn't deny it. Nor did I start making excuses. What were you doing together? She demanded accusingly. I looked at her and simply stated, we were on a date at this. She shrieked. I nodded and continued calmly, you have no right, we are married. What makes you think you can do that? I stood up, fetched a drink from the kitchen, and sat back down. She remained standing, staring intently at me, awaiting my response. Why should it bother you? I queried. Her mouth fell open in shock. We are married, but you want a divorce, don't you? She nodded, her voice uncertain. You said you don't love me, right? I stated. I'm not in love with you, she corrected me. And I agree with you, Linda. You're no longer in love with me, so why shouldn't I seek love with someone else? You want a divorce, you don't love me. What reason do I have to stay here with you? She slumped down into her chair, defeated. What will people say? Don't you realize how that looks? Now Carol is spreading gossip all over town about my husband dating some woman. Don't you dare call Jessica a woman, I growled. She was a perfect lady, and I was a gentleman last night. She knowingly went on a date with a married man. I called that a promiscuous woman, I said angrily, standing up and pacing in front of her. She's not married, and if she's a promiscuous woman, what would you call a married woman who knowingly dates other men without her husband's knowledge? Linda stared at me, speechless. I could see her thoughts churning. How much does he know? She panicked. What does that have to do with me? She exploded. I just looked at her. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. I remained silent. She saw it in my face, I knew. Her body began to tremble. How much do you know? Enough, I shouted. Whether you slept with them or not, I really don't care. You see, my dear, this marriage was over when you decided to count me out. I'm not going to cry about it. I'm moving on. I'm going to take care of myself since I get no support from my wife at home. I got up and went to the kitchen. Dinner wasn't ready, so I decided to make something for myself. She could cook for herself later. She entered the kitchen and watched as I finished my meal. I'm very sorry, she said to me. I put away the dishes and turned to her. I'm sorry too. I think you should know that I have plans for the rest of the week, so don't expect me home early. If you prefer, I can sleep in the guest room. She didn't respond. I went upstairs to go to bed. I decided to sleep in the guest room. I'm sure Linda had a restless night. I met Christina after work. She was a sweet blonde, about 35, divorced with 2 children. We chatted over coffee and then did something really silly. We took to playing laser tag, a team game using safe laser guns and sensors to record hits. Yes, it was 2 adults against 10 teenagers who all teamed up against us, annihilating us at the start of each game. Christina enjoyed it. I liked sitting and talking with her after we were killed, waiting for the next game to start. At one point during the last game, both of us were killed and fell side by side. I pulled her towards me while we were lying there and kissed her. She kissed me back. Then we had a nice dinner, and soon I walked her back to her house, where we kissed goodbye. She bade me farewell before things went beyond kissing and made me promise to ask her out again soon. I braced myself for another confrontation with Linda when I returned, but surprisingly she seemed subdued. "Hello," she said. I smiled and greeted her as I undressed after the date. "It seems you had a good time," she observed. Her emotions were concealed. "That's true. Thanks for noticing. How was your evening?" We talked for the first time in months. We sat down and talked until late at night, listening to each other. "I have never been intimate with anyone else, Frank, I swear to you," she confessed. "I kissed a few men and shared my thoughts and feelings with Justin at work. He wanted more from me, but I wasn't ready." "Linda, I'm sure we are both to blame for this, but even though you didn't actually have sex with anyone else, you still betrayed me. We were a team. I'm glad that you refrained from cheating on me before asking for a divorce. I really respect you for that. I should have listened to your feelings more," I admitted. "Yes," she agreed. We sat in silence for a while. "Frank, I'm confused right now. I don't know if I want a divorce," I smiled. "Let me know when you figure it out. I'm not kicking you out of the house, and I'm not planning to leave anytime soon." "Frank," she began, as I was already up and about to go to bed, "are you still going to see Jessica?" "Yes. I'm currently seeing her and others too. Do what you need to do to figure things out. I need to do what's best for me. If we end up getting a divorce, well then, it wasn't meant to be." I headed to the guest bedroom. She followed me and stopped in the doorway. "Frank," I turned to see her as I was taking off my shirt. "Come back to bed. Please," I hesitated. "Do you think that's wise?" Tears streamed down her face. "I don't know. I just want you right now." I reached out to her, and she threw herself into my arms and sobbed. She was confused. She didn't know what to feel. I carried her back to our bed. I held her as we fell asleep. Lauren was a good friend of mine. She was a fan, and we always talked about the latest TV shows and fandom stuff. We were at a neat bar with live music, which she was eager to visit, but none of her friends or dates were interested that evening. I took her with me. It was fun, and although we had occasionally flirted at work, there was absolutely no chemistry between us as romantic partners. We had a good time, but we were just friends. That was enough for both of us, and I got home early. I pulled up to the house and found a car parked in the driveway. My jealousy briefly reared its ugly head, but I calmed down and reminded myself that whatever happens, there's no point in worrying, right? I learned this from my psychiatrist while being treated for my fear of flying. Instead of panicking and thinking, "Oh God, I'm about to get on a plane," he made me shift to an excited and anticipatory tone. "Oh God, I'm about to get on a plane. I can't wait." It took some practice, but it generally worked in the short term. Not knowing what to expect, I repeated my mantra and opened the door to see Linda sitting and chatting with Carol, one of her friends. "Frank, I didn't expect you to be back so early," Linda said. Carol, I nodded at them. Carol shot me daggers with her eyes. She said, "Nothing. Work finished early, so here I am. Do you need some privacy?" Linda and Carol exchanged glances, then Carol rose from the couch. "I should be going, Linda. I'll talk to you soon." Linda walked Carol to the door. Carol gave me a disdainful look, said nothing to me, and left. "Sorry for intruding. I didn't mean to interrupt your evening," I said to her. "Don't be silly, Frank. This is your home too." When was the last time she or I called this place our home, she asked me. "Have you eaten?" There were leftovers from what she and Carol had apparently shared. I poked at the food while she busied herself cleaning up the kitchen. "How are you?" I asked. She sat down. "I'm okay, I think. I invited Carol over to talk, but she only confused me more. How so?" "She wanted me to kick you out, change the locks, and divorce your ass." "Well, my key still works, so I guess you didn't have time to call the locksmith," she laughed. "Don't be silly." I had to explain to her that I was the one who asked for the divorce after I told you that. "What rights do I have over you?" "I left you, right?" She looked intently into my eyes. That last part was a question she desperately wanted an answer to. I wanted to jump up and dispel her fears, tell her that I still belonged to her, but I didn't. I said nothing. In the past, my assurances would have pushed her away. Maybe this new non-committal stance might have a different impact on her. Changing the subject, I blurted out, "I'm afraid I have some bad news." My date for tomorrow night cancelled. Now I'm stuck with concert tickets. Maybe you'd like to go with me instead of another girl. Her face lit up. Oh, Frank, I would love to. I mean, if you want, I shrugged. Well, I could give these tickets to someone at work. No, she said decisively. I mean, I would be happy to go with me. She blushed and nodded. Are you sure? I asked. Yes, she whispered. I smiled. This could be fun. I broke the news to Heather. She was disappointed, but such is life in the dating game. Linda was dressed and ready to go when I picked her up after work. She looked good, dressed to impress. I was almost certain she dressed that way to impress me. I didn't know much about this band. Heather had suggested we go to this concert, so I bought the tickets. They were good loud, but good. I wasn't surprised when we ran into Heather. I saw that Linda was surprised by how good Heather looked, and she quickly realized that Heather would have been my date tonight. I apologized to Heather, and she looked at Linda. Heather, this is Linda. Linda, Heather was supposed to be my date tonight, but something came up. Usually, when I introduced Linda, I always called her my wife. This time I decided not to, and Linda noticed right away. Heather, it's so nice to meet you. I'm Mrs. Donaldson. She looked Heather directly in the eyes, and something passed between the two women. Heather was smart enough to apologize and said she'd see me at work the next day. Linda was seething with anger. She grabbed my hand. Frank, where is your wedding ring? I shrugged. At home. I took it off after you asked for a divorce. I don't need it anymore. Linda was once again at a loss for words. Honestly, it was fun to render her speechless. Frank, we aren't divorced yet. I smiled and focused on the music. Several times I went to the bar to refill our glasses. Each time, Linda watched me like a hawk. Every time I was at the bar, some woman would approach me and I would chat with her. I made one laugh and she even slipped me her number. Linda saw all this but said nothing. Actually, I'm not a ladies' man. I can flirt a bit, but I've always been respectful and never pushy. After Linda asked for a divorce, I allowed myself to be free. I discovered I had a rather blunt knack for flirting, and now that my restraint was gone, I found I didn't need to hold back. I wasn't the handsomest guy around, but I always had the ability to be witty, and I found that women seemed to appreciate my humor and frankness. For the first time in a long while, Linda saw me in action. I think it surprised her, but she must have realized that the same tricks, moves, and flirts had once captivated her heart. Tonight, I think she remembered just that. She was silent all the way home. I was silent too. Once we were home, we began to get ready for bed. Frank, where is your wedding ring? I pointed to the sock drawer in the dresser. She walked over and opened it. Reaching in, she grabbed the gold ring and pulled it out. She looked at it, then at me. The weight of the symbol hit her, and her eyes filled with tears. It's yours now, I told her. I think you should throw it away or sell it. She looked at me. What should I do with it? She asked hesitantly. I think whatever you want. The ring is a symbol of our love for each other, our marriage. At one point it was a shield, a warning that its wearer was unavailable to others. I highly doubt most people appreciate and recognize what this symbol means. I know that for me. This ring helped fend off other women. I hoped your ring would do the same for you. Ever since you decided not to live with me anymore, I think I no longer need this symbol to protect me. It only reminds me of what used to be. I looked her straight in the eyes until she met my gaze. When the time comes, you'll decide what to do with this ring. I approached her and closed her fingers around the gold band. She watched me and accepted it. Frank, she called out just as I was drifting to sleep. Thank you for the evening. I enjoyed the concert and spending time with you. Anytime, I replied and drifted back to sleep. In the morning, breakfast awaited me. Linda had made eggs and bacon. She was an excellent cook, and I appreciated her efforts. I noticed that Linda hadn't taken off her wedding and engagement rings. I also observed her fidgeting with them as she ate with me that morning. Carol called me at work. Carol, I'm surprised to hear from you. What can I do for you lunch today? 12:30 at Bohemia. She hung up, and I stared at the dead phone. I wasn't sure what to expect at lunch. I didn't know Carol very well. Linda had befriended her at work. She seemed pleasant, but had never been very friendly toward me. She was one of Linda's friends with whom they often talked together. I entered the bar where I had invited Jessica that first evening. She was already sitting at a table covered with a white linen tablecloth, and she waved at me. Her face was tense and stern, suggesting this conversation would not be pleasant. As soon as I sat down and my order was taken, Carol fixed me with a glare. "What the hell are you up to? Linda is in agony, and you're pulling this stupid stunt, dating other women right in front of her." For the first time, I felt myself blush. It was partly embarrassment, partly anger. I quickly shut my mouth before I could say something I would regret. I realized immediately that anything I said or did at this lunch would be reported straight back to Linda. She watched me as I regained control of my emotions. I spent a long time contemplating how to respond. Finally, I began to speak. "Carol, how much do you really know about what's going on with Linda? I know her husband is acting like a complete idiot," she growled. People around us looked in our direction. "Carol, stop talking nonsense. Answer my question honestly, and I'll answer yours. I have nothing to hide. Do you?" Carol swallowed, relieved when our waiter chose that moment to bring our food. I sat and waited. "Linda is confused," Carol admitted. "So confused that she needs to see other men to sort out her thoughts." Carol blushed and took a sip of water. "Linda has had her weak moments, I bet," I said sarcastically. "We've been trying to help her figure things out," Carol replied. "You see, my dear Carol, this is where I take exception. Why are you and your friends taking it upon yourselves to help her sort out her marriage?" Carol was silent. "Really, what business is it of yours? Linda is my friend, and so what I counted. I should be her best friend, her partner, her life companion. Don't you think that if she had any problems, she should have talked to me first? Don't you think she should have come to me to sort things out? Instead, she goes to her friends, who apparently are such good and responsible people that they take her to places where she can sort out her feelings with other men. Men who apparently don't care that they're kissing another man's wife." Carol went pale. No. She turned very pale. It seemed like she suddenly lost her appetite. Somehow, Carol had unleashed my anger. She was just another foolish so-called friend who decided to meddle in other people's affairs. "Let me ask you something, Carol. Are you married?" She shook her head no. "Have you ever been married?" Another shake. "Do you have a degree in counseling?" No. "So what gives you the right to advise someone about marriage? You've never been married, so how would you know what it's like? What gives you the right to meddle in someone else's marriage?" She gasped. "But I'm her friend, not from where I'm sitting." "How many times have you talked to me?" "Once or twice, as far as I remember. I've been married to Linda for 15 years. But when have you ever taken the time in your life to talk and get to know the man and partner of your friend?" "I've been in her life for 15 years, so I understand her like no one else does. You talk about giving advice, you talk about helping her get through this, but what do you really know about me other than what Linda has told you from her perspective?" I could see Carol was about to cry. I had reached her as best as I could. Now, to convey the message through her to Linda. "Carol," Linda told me how she felt. She wanted a divorce, she told me, and I quoted, "Don't love you anymore." Well, Carol, tell me, how am I supposed to respond to that? What possible argument can I make to say she's wrong? She wanted the divorce. Why should I be unhappy, hoping she'll change her mind? I finished my drink. My food was half eaten, but I was done. I stood up and gave Carol one last look. I found that other women see something in me that my wife no longer does. She pushed me away. I didn't push her away. I'm not going to put my life on hold because my partner is confused and no longer wants me. I'm trying to move on. How she feels about that is her own affair. I'm no longer trying to convince her or tell her what she should feel. Now, I can accept that. With that final statement, I left before Carol could say anything else. I knew that as soon as I exited the restaurant, she would be on the phone with Linda. That evening, I was going to meet Janet. Things went very well with Janet. She was different from the others. She was a younger black woman, very beautiful and very attractive. We were very polite and formal when she first joined our company, but a few months later, there was a moment when I was telling a rather spicy joke to some guys, and just as I reached the punchline, Janet walked into the room behind me. The men around me noticed her and held their breath as I turned to see her shocked face. I flashed her a rather mischievous smile and said, "Admit it, that's really funny." She stood there for a moment with an expression that said, "I can't believe this white guy just said that to me," then burst out laughing along with me. From that moment, she was one of the guys, but by the end of my date with her, she was all woman. Janet allowed me to go further than I had on other dates, and at the very last moment, I was the one who declined her offer to stay the night. As much as I wanted to, there were issues with Linda that needed to be resolved before I could sleep with another woman. Frank, Linda asked as I settled into bed. Yes, Frank, I need you to take a shower. Why, it was dark, the light was off. But Linda's voice was breaking. I could hear her sobbing. Please, Frank, if you don't take a shower, then I'll have to ask you to go sleep in the guest room. I was confused. What's happening? I turned on the bedside lamp and saw my wife. Her face was red and her eyes were moist. She couldn't look me in the eyes. Please, Frank, you can come back to our bed, but I'm asking you, please take a shower. What's wrong? I always shower in the mornings, honey. You know that she turned away from me, her entire body turning away. You smell like her. Oh, you smelled like Janet. Yes, I got out of bed, feeling awful. I looked at her. She was still turned away from me. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Listen, if you want me to go to the guest room, I can do that. No, she sobbed. I want you to come back to our bed. Frank, I can't stand the smell of someone else on you. I just can't. I'm sorry. I want you in our bed. It's bad enough knowing that you're seeing others. I can pretend you're out with the guys. I can ignore my friends telling me who they've seen you with. I could even convince myself that people like that girl Heather and I were just friends, but now I know differently. I can smell her on you, I can tell. I want you to come back to our bed, but only after you take a shower. I can't stand her scent on you. I walked over to her side of the bed, didn't linger, and leaned down to kiss her forehead. I'm sorry I was inconsiderate. Let me take a shower and I'll come back to our bed. The next morning was Saturday, and I slept in. It had been a long week for me, going out every night. I felt my age and hoped I wouldn't come down with a cold or something. Linda woke me up with breakfast, then asked me what my plans were. I don't have anything planned for the weekend, I told her. Frank, I was still sitting at the kitchen table. What she reached into her pocket and pulled something out, came over to me, and knelt down in front of me. She opened her hand, and inside I saw my wedding ring. Grabbing my hand, she looked up at me. Frank, I want to work on our marriage. I think maybe I didn't think everything through. She carefully started sliding the ring onto my finger. I let her. I still love you. She remained kneeling, waiting for me to say something. Finally, I spoke. Do you really feel that way? She nodded. No divorce? She nodded vigorously. What about other men? There's no one else but you there. It was now came the most delicate part. You all might think I'm crazy for this, but I went ahead anyway. You need to understand that I will still occasionally see other women. Linda swallowed. We sat like that for a long time, our eyes meeting throughout this process. I learned something about my wife. I was confident about the outcome. Finally, she nodded. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, she said. I think I'm in love with you too, I told her. I grabbed her and kissed her passionately, and she kissed me back. As it turned out, Linda had low self-esteem. I treated her well, entirely so. Over the years, we had drifted apart. My biggest mistake was not acknowledging her feelings every time she shared them. Do you know how harmful it is, how arrogant it is for someone to tell another person that what they feel is not true? All it did was build up resentment and hostility towards me. Over time, I pushed her to the point where she no longer valued what she had. Actually, maybe it's my fault, but over time we changed. Well, she changed. I never changed, so why would I want to go back to the way I was before? I took a guess she wanted me to go back, but we both had changed. Now she knew that there were others behind the scenes, ready to replace her if she decided to go her own way. Do you really have to see other people? She whimpered. I'm not planning to see other men. I looked at her and smiled. Yes, I will do that from time to time. You may be my wife, but I am your husband, remember that, and I won't forget about you. She smiled. Yes, she smiled. Take me to bed and show me what I've been missing. Show me what all these other girls got from you. Do you think you have what I need? I asked. I'll just show you my love and maybe wear you out so much that you won't have energy for any other woman. I picked her up and carried her to the bedroom. I set her down on the bed, and we both removed our clothes with a sense of urgency that was almost frantic. Our lust and passion exploded as I took her, then she took me, and then she took me again. Somewhere along the way, she realized from my stamina that I hadn't slept with any of the other women. After 15 years, my wife knows what I can do in bed. For the rest of the day, she had a knowing smile. I kept silent. What happened on my dates was a topic I did not bring up, neither did she. It was a chapter in our life that was best left in the past. From then on, I no longer asked her about the men she had kissed and talked to. My wife now looks at me with a certain degree of reverence and respect. I would never have believed that my plan would work. It wasn't a very good plan, and initially I was just too stubborn to give her the satisfaction of seeing her destroy her husband with her hurtful words and request for a divorce. When I saw how she reacted and accepted that I was seeing other women while she stayed at home waiting for me, I pushed my plan further. I won her back by distancing myself from her. What you don't have, you want the most. What you have, you want the least. Those are the words I live by now. By freeing both her and myself, we are now more together than before. So, am I seeing others? I haven't had to yet. The first sign that Linda is reverting to her old self will lead to my next date. I know this, she knows this, and together we work to not just listen to each other, but to truly hear each other. Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments, and we'll see you on the Cheating Stories channel.